disciple, and we ended with talking about how important persistence was. So we need to be a white magician and manifest positive things on the earth. We need persistence and just in the quality of enduring to the end. The end in the Greek and the Bible, where it says endure to the end, means consummation. In other words, endure until the goal is reached. And this is what a lot of people don't do. They get halfway there and it's kind of tough, and so they quit. And so you can't quit. You got to keep on. If you keep on, then um, you will eventually reach your goal. And there's always going to be problems manifest. But the key is, and this is something that a lot of people overlook, is making corrections. Because it's like driving a car down the road. You have to, if you drive one block, you have to make dozens of corrections with the steering wheel, or else you're going to drive off the road. Okay. If you think that you're just going to make your goal and have all the plans set and then just go, well, you're going to crash. You need to make corrections as you go, because you're always going to find things that you're doing wrong, things that you're going to need to improve on. If we don't pay attention to that, we won't reach the goal. So this is part of the persistence and enduring to the end, is getting that, paying attention to the corrections that manifest and what we have to do. If the ego is powerful in the person, he thinks it's so perfect he doesn't need to make corrections. That person's going to have problem after problem and be frustrated time and time again. To make corrections requires a certain amount of humility, so that humility has to enter in, realizing that we're not perfect, that we're going to make mistakes. So we need to be aware of these mistakes and aware of the corrections that we have to make along the path. And making those corrections, that's really important. The other quality he says is detachment, and this is a difficult one for a lot of people. He says a student must not identify too much with his creation and learn the principle of silence. He says many creative efforts are just doomed because the student doesn't follow this principle. Okay, he spoke a number of times about the student identifying too much with his creation. How do you think that takes place? How does a person wind up identifying too much with what he's working on? Let's pick on somebody here. Annie, what do you think about that? How can you wind up identifying too much with your creation?
Probably if you desire it so much that it gets part of your personality. I mean, if you really, it gets to be a part of you so much that you can't let it go.
Yeah, and what do you think about, do you think the people maybe micromanaging might be part of it? In other words, it's identifying so much with them that they don't let anybody else in?
Yeah, sure.
Have you seen that before?
Yeah, I think it's happening very often. It's also happening when you are trying to do work with other people. If you hang on too much to your own ideas, you don't listen to other people's ideas and you don't take in what they're saying sometimes. I mean, you have to do that because otherwise it's not a cooperation, it's just you taking your way.
Yeah, it's one statement I like by Ronald Reagan. He says, it's amazing what you can get done when you don't care who takes the credit.
Yeah, that's another thing.
Yeah, right. I've Another way I've seen this manifest is when, say, a company lays off a bunch of people, and then the press is like interviewing these poor people that lost their jobs, and you hear somebody say, "Well, this is the only thing I know. This is the only thing I can do." And so this person is identified so much with his job, he's just lost when his company goes out of business, because he says, that's all I know. Now, the disciple should never be in that position where he thinks, this is all I can do. Matter of fact, DK says there's one quality an advanced disciple has that the ordinary guy doesn't have, is that he can excel at anything he puts his mind to do. So say Annie here, she's a good disciple, good example of a disciple. If she wanted to play a musical instrument, she could probably learn and do it well. You may already do that, I don't know. If she wanted to be a teacher, she could be a good teacher. If she wanted to be a politician, she could probably be a great politician. You know, she could do just about anything she set her mind to do, and do it a lot and do it quite well. And he says this is one of the qualities of disciples. And I see a lot of people here in this group that I think could tackle most anything that they set their mind to do, and do it pretty good. And of course, there's certain natural abilities all of us have, and all of us are on certain rays and certain bents of interest, where certain things are easier for us than others. But if we had to, most people here could excel at anything they put their mind to do.
Another thing,
yeah.
A master has to know how and when to recreate himself completely. Like if I'm in this nice, comfortable place, doing what I like to do. If it fell apart, I would have to recreate myself, maybe go into life coaching or massage therapy again, live in a different place, live in a trailer if I had to, do whatever it took to begin and be able to let go in my mind of how things were and move into the future that I'm recreating.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you're trying to create a form and set it free, if you identify too much with that form doesn't get set free. It becomes your anchor. And I was telling somebody this week, sometimes the divine course of action can be to not give a shit.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Now, he talks about the principle of silence, and he says, he talks about premature speech and too much talk, that it causes the child of his creation to be stillborn. He says all workers in the field of the world should realize or recognize the need for silent detachment and work before every student who reads the instructions must consist in cultivating a detached attitude. It is a mental detachment which enables the thinker to dwell ever in the high and secret place, and from that center of peace calmly and powerfully carry out the work he has set before himself. Now, the problem he's talking about is this. We often see this. Somebody comes up with a great idea, okay? So he says, man, I got this great idea, and he starts telling everybody about everything he's going to do. And he says, I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that. And he's a big talker. And then what happens? Nothing gets done. He fails. And then he comes up with another great idea, and he talks big, and nothing happens. And this is what the Tibetan talks about. He says his focus is on his speech rather than doing. Okay, so he says by having what you need to do is take your idea and focus it internally so you can plan on how to execute it, and not spend your energy and just broadcasting it, because this disperses your energy, but keep silent about many things about how you're going to accomplish it, and just make it happen. And he says this will give you much more power to move the project forward. Now, I can only think of 2 examples in my life that kind of went against this mold. One was Muhammad Ali. He used to go up and say, I'm the greatest and I'm going to massacre and take care of this guy, and he's going to be decimated in front of me. And then he made it happen. So he's one exception. Another exception is Trump. Trump is always talking about how greater things he's going to do, and he's made a lot of things happen in his life. So those are 2 kind of exceptions. And the reason they're exceptions is because they were both had powerful first ray energy. If a person has powerful first ray energy, he can broadcast somewhat about what he's going to do, and this presents the power of will to the people, and then it can actually further his accomplishment. But for those that are not on powerful first ray, silence is an extremely powerful tool. And even if you're on the first ray, like Muhammad Ali, that was a tactic that he had. In other words, it wasn't, he probably kept quite a few things to himself that give him power, but his, what he did reveal and what he did brag about was part of a strategy that he put together. But for most people,
Intimidated his opponents.
yeah, for most people, it's not a strategy. For most people, it's just an ego thing that they're just trying to let everybody know, hey, I got this great plan, and they want to talk about that and get praise from it. But say with Muhammad Ali, I don't think it was to get praise. I think it was to rattle his opponents, and part of his plan to succeed the way that he did that. But in most times, it's best to silently put together your plan and then execute it step by step and reveal it only as necessary and speak about it only as necessary to make that next step happen. Because each plan that we have, each idea manifests one step at a time. And the tendency in human beings is to make it happen just overnight, and it doesn't happen that way. And even the masters themselves, I think, are a little bit, make predictions a little bit off because they want things to happen as fast as possible also. So I think it's a human tendency in life itself to want things to happen faster than they do the good things in life. That's why everybody has predicted the second coming, thinks it's going to happen the next 10 years for the past 2,000 years. You know, it's always going to happen in the next decade or so because people want it to happen now. It's just like Rick was talking about the formation of the molecule. He wants it to happen within his lifetime. We all want the good things, especially the supernatural manifestations and the coming of the new age. We want to be able to experience that in our lifetime, and we may experience some of it, but some of it we may have to wait till our next lifetime. So he that believeth, like Isaiah says, shall not make haste. So it's important that we proceed, but not in haste, and not be overly optimistic, but be realistic and use the power of silence where we withdraw within ourselves and we make the plans quietly and quietly execute them. But every once in a while, there's, like say, there's a time and place for everything, and there's a time to be like Muhammad Ali if the soul approves and say, look, we're going to make this happen and execute it within this length of time. Every once in a while, there's a time and place for that. So we can't, we never say never is the watchword here, but pay attention to the advice DK gives here.
I think
Okay.
he gave good advice. He said, make haste slowly.
Right. That's really good advice.
Make haste slowly. That was interesting. Play on words.
He says the sacrifices we make toward non-attachment will return 1,000-fold in benefits. Now, he doesn't usually exaggerate. He says 1,000-fold. Boy, that's a lot. But you know, it is. But he talks about sacrifices for non-attachment. You have to make sacrifices because if you're attached to an outcome, then to let that attachment go is difficult. But when you let it go, it gives you much more power to manifest and to make your next step, to make your contacts and so on. Then he stresses the need to apply attachment in real life rather than theory. Now he criticizes a lot of disciples and aspirants out there that, yeah, they think they understand all this non-attachment and they meditate on it and everything, but he says a lot of it is just theory with them. He says they need to actually practice the non-attachment, and that's where the difficulty comes in, is applying it in real life. Now, the next thing he talks about, which is really important, is non-criticism. He says this is very difficult. This is another thing he says that everybody agrees with. We shouldn't be too critical, but when it comes down to it, he says it's quite difficult for many students to actually apply correctly, because it's fine when everything is going smooth, when everybody's lovey-dovey, but when somebody does something that maybe seems a little odd, then the desire to criticize them comes forward. And in a group such as this, you know, you will have people feel like, you know, so-and-so is out of line here and we need to throw him out of the group to make things work, instead of trying to be inclusive and trying to make the group work with everybody in it and make the corrections necessary. So this is this non-criticism thing is extremely important, because when a person begins to be critical, then he opens the door for a grievance to come in. Because let's say you have a problem with somebody else in a group you're working with, and you don't feel the problem is solved, then what happens? Then a grievance comes in. And when a grievance comes in, what does that block you from? Let's let Kenny answer this. How does a grievance interfere with, what does the grievance block the disciple from, Ken?
Well, I get it would probably block your ability to focus on what you should be focusing on.
Block the ability to what?
To focus your thoughts on what you need to be. It's distracting.
Yeah, it certainly blocks the ability to take your next step. How about your communication with your soul? What does it do to that?
Yeah, definitely that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Have you ever had any? Now you strike me as a guy that doesn't have much grievance toward anything. Have you ever had any problem with a grievance throughout your life?
Oh, when I was younger, more than 20 years ago, I had a grievance with one person in particular that kind of picked on me when I was younger.
Yeah,
I got,
that
yeah,
could
I
do
got
the
beat.
trick, huh?
Yeah, I got beat up pretty good, and I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and oh, I was angry about that.
Were you? Yeah.
Years. But I finally was able to let go of that.
How were you able to work through that?
Really, I probably when I started in my Bible studies and when I was trying to understand where Jesus was talking about, to forgive your enemies and stuff like that. And the more I thought about it, and that we're all one. And even though I didn't understand the oneness quite so much then, but somehow I knew it was true. I just didn't understand it yet.
Yeah.
So I knew this guy's my brother. So I was finally able to look at him and smile.
Well, that's great. Because a lot of people, when they go through something like that, they die with a grievance still in their heart, and that's kind of sad when that happens. So
Yeah.
that's great you were able to work through that.
Yeah.
And so if we can do away with this critical attitude, so we can look on our brothers, and the way to do this, what I try to do in my life, is when somebody does something that's screwy or offensive, first of all, let's say somebody says something I consider offensive. What I try to do is I try to look at it from their point of view, and I ask myself, did this person really mean to offend me? And often when I ask this question and try to look in the guy's heart from his point of view, I come to the conclusion, no, in his mind, he wasn't really trying to offend me. He was just saying what he thought, and without trying to offend anybody, he was just careless in the way he worded this. And oftentimes, more than half of the time, that dissipates it right there when you look at why the guy said what he said. And sometimes the guy said what he said because of something that you said. So then if you can't resolve it by putting yourself in that person's position, then you have to have a conversation with him and share your feelings and dissipate any negativity. But so that will dissipate a lot of criticism if we just try to put ourselves in the other guy's shoes. People that had near-death experiences, some of them report this interesting thing, is they say one of the things that they were able to do when they looked over their life was they saw the interplay of them with other people in their lives from their consciousness. And they said when they saw this, they saw that the things that they really criticized these other people for, they understood why they did what they did, and it put them in a totally different light than they saw them when the incident happened. So I found that kind of interesting, and I believe it to be a true principle, and I think that's going to actually happen after we leave the body. But he says, now, many people justify their criticism by making this statement. They'll say, well, I just telling the truth. I mean, what's the matter with telling the truth? People should be able to handle the truth, shouldn't they? So what do you think about this? Let's pick on somebody else here. Deanie, how about that? Is there a problem with telling people the truth? If somebody's fat, is that okay to just tell them, hey, you're too fat?
You gotta unmute there, Deanie.
I'll unmute her here. Oh, can't get her unmuted. Can't hear you, Deanie.
I'm here.
There you go. Okay.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm having problems with the page here. I have had issues in my 40s that I learned to deal with through a lot of pain during my divorce. And one of the greatest first teachers that appeared was a wonderful lady from church. And I was hysterical because my husband was walking out. And of course, now I know that we both wanted it to happen. And she just said, I want you to stop crying immediately and tell me what you have to do today. And so I said, what do you mean? She said, what do you really have to do today? And I said, well, pick up the children and cook dinner. And she said, that's all God wants you to do, period. Use your energy to be present for the children, and God has it all worked out. God knows what's happening. God knows why everything's happening, but you have to focus on being completely present. And that's what the 12-step program taught me to learn to do, was to live in the present, take one day at a time, and be quiet. And I was able to contain a lot of my pain. I was in another type of inner child therapy too. But the other thing that she told me, my Jungian therapist, was to write a letter to someone that you feel like will not listen to you. They've already shown that they will never agree with your opinion, is to write a letter to them. And I did a 3-page letter to a nasty neighbor that let her kids play out in the dark till 12 o'clock at night. And after I wrote that letter, of course, I was told to tear it up or burn it. I had an incredible release of resentment towards her. And so I have 2 siblings I have issues with, and that's what I'm working on right now, is to write them about my grievance and turn it over. So
Okay.
that's it for now.
Okay. Well, that's a good way to work through those problems. That sounds good. Okay, let's pick on Mindy. Mindy, how do you handle a truth that's delicate? Like, let's say somebody is really overweight that you know of, and their overweight problem is creating health risks for them. Do you tell them they're too fat, or what do you tell them?
Well, not probably in those exact words. You can
Is it
make some helpful suggestions for things that could be beneficial for them without hurting their feelings.
right? In other words, sometimes you do tell them, but tell them in as careful a way as you can.
Yeah.
Yeah, because but this is a problem with criticism, is that many criticisms that people give are honest criticisms, but they just disrupt people's feelings, disrupt the group, and take people's attention off the good, the beautiful, and the true. And many times the criticism just doesn't do any good to say. The overweight person, for instance, that's a easy one to pick on. He's aware that he's overweight, and he's aware of what he needs to do, but he's just not doing it. And to tell him he's fat is just going to make him angry. Okay. Now
You
on
need
the
to,
other,
you just
yeah,
need to
Kurt,
tell him he's lazy.
yeah.
Or
So
no,
so let's suppose you have a good friend that's overweight, like Curtis and I had our good friend Wayne was overweight, and he was on a terrible diet. Did you ever give Wayne advice on his diet, Curtis?
Hmm.
Not to eat
Yeah,
so many rolls and stuff,
yeah.
donuts.
Talking to Wayne about that was kind of like teaching a pig to sing. It wastes your time and annoys the pig.
Yeah.
But he had so many other good qualities that they overshadowed all of his negative traits. But it's not always wise to reveal all truth. And with Wayne, you could hint at things, but you're right. He already knew that he was on a destructive course. You know, it was set. There was not much that he was going to do about it. You know, it just led to his death.
Yeah.
And nothing we could say or do was going to change it.
Yeah, we never come out and said, Wayne, you're too fat. We would come out and say, Wayne, you're eating too much of this Diet Coke and you're eating too many of these donuts and you need to switch over and eat some better stuff. And whenever Artie and I talked to Wayne about his diet, he agreed with us 100%. He wasn't offended. He didn't feel criticized. He agreed with us, but then he just ignored the advice.
Well, he liked to go to smorgasbords. He liked his attitude was quantity over quality. So the one thing we did try to help him with was to eat better food, less food, and enjoy the higher quality of good food.
Yeah, and yeah, he was a great guy, but we were all concerned about his health because he ate such a bad diet of a lot of donuts and Diet Coke and things that aren't good for you. And we knew he was. We figured we'd lose him prematurely, which we did. But yeah, so he denied us the company of a really great guy because he wouldn't listen to our advice. But we always tried to give it to him in a way that didn't offend him, and it didn't offend him. He didn't take offense. So some people take offense a lot easier than others. The advantage of Wayne was he was a hard person to offend. You could say most anything to him and he wouldn't be offended. So we could talk to him about it. Other people, you just get the sense that if you even mention anything about diet or being overweight or anything, that they're going to be highly offended. Just speaking of one area of life here. So
a lot of their guilt is behind the offense. They feel guilty about it, and they don't want to be reminded of the truth.
That's exactly right. I mean, if people feel guilty about something and you bring up the guilt again in them, they're just going to be angry at you. And so this is why criticism should only be given when you have confirmation from your inner self that it needs to be said. If you don't have that confirmation, it's just pretty much best to leave it unsaid. Now, Dale Carnegie writes a lot about how to handle criticism, and he points out this, that people overall feel justified in what they're doing. They feel they're doing the best they can, and when you criticize them, you're telling them that their best isn't good enough. And so people are very up in the air about being criticized. They don't like it. And if you want to make a friend not very friendly, make him feel criticized. But he says, if you do have to criticize, if you feel there's no way around it, that sometimes you reach a point with a friend or associate that something has to be said, he says, well, how do you go about doing it? And he says, what you should do then is warm him up by saying positive things and present it in the most positive way, saying that, boy, you know, you're really good at doing this. And, you know, if everything would be almost perfect if you made this correction. Okay, so you butter him up by emphasizing something positive that he's done, or a positive direction, or a positive outcome. Visualize what will happen when the correction is made, and then say, if we could just make this one correction, boy, things would be so much better. And so instead of just saying you are bad, always put the emphasis on what is good and the good that is going to happen. But even doing this, sometimes the person will be offended. So sometimes there's no way around offending people. And every once in a while, your soul will tell you to go ahead and say it, even if the person gets offended. Sometimes it has to be said. but 9 times out of 10, we're better off not even bringing up the criticism and focusing on the positive, and the person eventually will correct himself. But doesn't always happen. So
That's
there's,
called the
yeah,
sandwich. When I do coaching, that's called the sandwich approach, where you butter them up and you got a nice, tell them how good they're doing in certain areas. And then the meat is when you have to kind of put the knife in and tell them what needs to be corrected. And then after that, take them out to lunch or do something positive with them that lets them know you're still their friend. You're just doing it out of love, not anger, spite.
right. That's a really good point you made there, is that if you do have to criticize somebody and they do feel offended, then approach them with goodwill, not bringing up the subject again, but just trying to befriend them and showing them that, hey, I'm your friend. I'm not trying to destroy you or anything. And so that's a really good point to make. And if they accept that approach, then they'll kind of forget the criticism or forget the negativity from the criticism.
Yeah, that's the sandwich.
Yeah.
I had an experience with an offensive person back in my hippie days. We were hanging out in the living room playing guitars and stuff, and after dinner, all the folks just enjoying each other's company. And this biker comes over, and he's like Goliath to my David. He's trying to pick a fight with everybody in the room, insulting this one and that one for their haircut and their everything you could think of. And he looks at me, and I said, I think we need to go out back and have a conversation about this. And he just lit up about that. Oh, yeah, we get me a fight here. And so I lead the way out to the back door, and it's through the kitchen. And as we're walking through, I'm in front of him. I see an empty wine bottle on the countertop. So I grab it. Well, unbeknownst to me, he grabs a carving knife.
Ooh.
So we get out in the backyard, and he's going to kill me. And I turn around as we get there, and I hold the bottle out and say, take this bottle. And he's like, what the? I said, just take it and listen. I said, you see that? There's a piece of a sidewalk, a slab of concrete leaning up against the base of a tree about 20 feet away. And I said, here's what you do. I said, well, give yourself a nice big wind up pitch. Shout out 5 or 6 words that you wouldn't say in front of your mama, and see if you can hit that concrete slab right in the middle. So he winds up, and he's like, bang! And when that glass smattered into a billion pieces, you could just see the lights come on. He just lit up. He says, you just fixed me. You just
Really?
And he wanted, from that point on, he wanted to be my best friend in the world. We went back inside, and he listened to the songs and enjoyed the evening with all of us. It's like sometimes you just have to know how to turn around things on them.
Yeah, I found when I was a kid, I got out of a number of fights by just distracting the person, to shifting his attention from one thing to another. And that's a really good tactic. You shifted his attention. Now, DK says this. He says, because, speaking of critical thought, because in a sudden burst of critical thought, the entire personality can be galvanized into a potent coordination, but of a wrong kind and with disastrous results. Because criticism, being a faculty of the lower mind, can hurt and wound, and no man can proceed upon the way as long as the wounds are made and the pain is knowingly given. In the pressure of the present opportunity, there is no time for criticism to exist between workers. They hinder each other and they hinder the work. Okay, so unless a person gets some type of confirmation from his soul, it's just best not to criticize, but to do our best to direct the minds of co-workers toward the end result, the positive end that we're working toward. He says the day of opportunity, he says, isn't going to last forever for workers. And we must realize how damaging criticism is, especially to co-workers, and the importance of practicing harmlessness. Okay, so especially a co-worker, like in a group such as this, where we're all working together toward the same end and learning the same things. So it's important. Now, let's suppose that somebody here criticized somebody else in the group right now. Okay, the whole group would be focused on that all of a sudden. So the minds of everybody in the group would be focused on this problem, and we wouldn't get much done. The end result wouldn't be very positive. It's best to handle that offline, or if you have a problem with an individual, to handle it on one-on-one if it has to be handled. But in a group, it's best to keep the tone as positive as possible.
Tell that to Washington.
Yeah, right. I mean, they're setting a heck of a bad example for us, and they're supposed to be our leaders. They're supposed to be the enlightened among us, and they're not setting the example they're supposed
Yeah,
to
look
set.
at all they're not getting done that they could be getting done.
Yeah, it's terrible. It's reminds me of if you read the history of the Civil War and just before, the only other time in history I can think of like this was just before the Civil War happened. There was tremendous negativity between the left and right in Congress. Okay, if the workers would practice detachment, he says, knowing that the law works and that God's purposes must come to an ultimate conclusion. This is what we were talking about earlier. That purpose is something that must manifest. And if they would learn to never criticize in thought or word, the salvaging of the world would proceed apace, and the new age of love and illumination would be ushered in.
Amen.
Okay, very simple. If we just did that one thing, had goodwill, very slow to criticize, if we did those two things, if the average person, average man on the street could just get that in his head, the new age could come tomorrow. And that ends Rule 13. Finally got to the end of it there. Next week, we're going to talk about Rule 14. I'm just going to read it here before we sign off. The sound swells out. The hour of danger to the soul courageous draweth near. The waters have not hurt the white creator, and naught could drown nor drench him. Danger from fire and flame menaces now, and dimly yet the rising smoke is seen. Let him again after the cycle of peace call upon the solar angel. Beautiful words, and if it's the first time you read them, you probably won't understand anything in there, but even if you don't understand it, it registers that there's really something here, that the words are really beautiful. And we're going to discuss them. We just got 2 more rules to go, and this is a pretty interesting one. We'll talk about that next week. We'll meet together Sunday at 2 o'clock, all being well. And in the meantime, we're going to have a nice Thanksgiving weekend. Hope everybody enjoys a good Thanksgiving dinner with their family and friends. In America, Annie, do you have any equivalent to the American Thanksgiving over there in Denmark?
No, not really. I mean, we know it because it's American, and some people also celebrate, but it's not a Danish thing.
Some people actually celebrate it over there?
Yeah, sure.
Oh.
Because the world is small now.
It's a good idea, no matter what country you live in, to have one day of the year where you focus on being thankful for what you got.
Absolutely.
And so I think Lincoln was the one that come up with making that official holiday, if I remember right. But yeah. Okay, so any other comments or questions before we sign off?
Well, I said something critical in a group a couple of weeks ago, and it set off a bombshell of a lot of hidden and percolating angst within that group. And I see the problem.
Was it this group or another group?
That was another group.
Oh, what happened?
Well, it sort of all fell apart.
The group fell apart?
To a great extent, yes.
That can happen.
But there was a lot of unresolved angst that was boiling under the surface.
Did you feel it had to come out?
Well, sometimes within ourselves, we feel that when something is being said that goes contrary to what we believe, we have to speak.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, you're the type of person that I think if you understand if you look through your eyes, you won't be offended. If you don't look through your eyes, you possibly could be. But if you look through your eyes, I think that's what I think that's one of the keys to making things run smoothly. Is oftentimes, I know sometimes I don't even think I'm being critical, and somebody will think I am being critical, and I think, well, wasn't even trying to say anything negative, you know. So it's a very delicate thing to handle and to maneuver in life is criticism, when to speak and when not to speak. So we find by doing, if we say the wrong thing or the wrong time, it will manifest, and then we will be wiser next time. So hopefully you did the right thing, Ed. You never know. I know whatever you did, you had the right intention. Okay, any other comments or questions?
Well, just
I
remember.
have a comment.
Go ahead, Deanie.
I think on Facebook, it's with the kerfuffle that happens is if the people were face to face and really knew each other, some of the things that are being said wouldn't even be considered. And we have to really pause and think before we type words that are inflammatory or misinterpreted. Even though they may be true, they can be received and cause damage. So
yeah, one of the biggest errors I ever made in my life was when I first got on the internet groups, and I thought, boy, this is going to be great, because in real life, if you say the wrong thing, you just can't take it back. Sometimes you impulsively say stuff that's offensive, and you just can't take it back. I says, but the great part about this internet is if you type something that's negative and then you read it over, you can erase it, and you can make your conversation a lot nicer than in person. Boy, was I wrong about that. There's something about the guy not being 1,000 miles away, he can't punch you in the face. So people just blurt out whatever is on their mind, even worse than in real life in many cases. Now, there's a handful of people that filter their language carefully, but I say the majority of them are a lot less cautious on the internet than they are in person. And that was one of the greatest errors in judgment I've ever made in my life, because I thought people would be nicer when they could read over what they wrote and then not say it. Where in real life, you blurt stuff out and you can't take it back. But so the internet didn't turn out to be as pleasant of conversation territory as I thought it would be. But among good people like this group here we have right here, it works. But other places it doesn't work so well. Okay, any other comments or questions?
I have a question. What do you do when people lie about you?
Well, you have to call them on it if it's a lie about you. What I do, if somebody says something wrong about me, I say, you said this, and this is the truth. And then I go back and forth on that after that. But I try not to let them get away with it. But you have to call them on it if it's an outright lie about you. But you have to say, now you said this, and this is the truth. Instead of saying, what I don't say is I don't say, hey, you're a liar. I've never called anyone a liar in my life because I know that's fighting words. Instead of calling them a liar, says, you said this, and this is the truth. That's the way that I approach it. And it's the most harmless way I can think of approaching that, but they do need to be made aware that what they said is not the truth.
And how they handle that, that's a great test too.
Yeah. Now, another thing you can say is, you said this and it made me feel this way. If they understand it hurt your feelings, if they're sensitive at all, then that can make them change also. And
Yeah, I start off what I
but you
want
don't want to just call them a liar. That just aggravates them.
Yes.
start off by saying, what I want you to know is when you said this, it made me feel a certain way.
Yeah.
What I want you to know, or something I want you to know. But, you know, what I try to follow is the principle of correction. Anything, I say a lot of dumb things. I screw up a lot. But I can correct it. I can fix it. I can make it better. You know, if we just keep the lines of communication open and ask yourself, in this conflict or in this confronting or critical period, what's my intention? Is my intention to create harmony and a closer relationship? Or is the conflict going to create a division and a separation? So if you keep in mind your intentions are to use the love that we have to bring us closer together, then you can say the truth pretty much how it is, and people will consider it. If they see that your intention is to really bring harmony and a close